1917, France. With more than 1 million French dead, this was the third horrific year of World War I, and there was still no end in sight to the bloody struggle. But on the morning of June the 13th, amid the frontline fighting, a ship brought a much-needed ray of optimism to the French port of Boulogne. The ship bore an American general, John J. Pershing, a stocky man with a straight back and a tough exterior, including a large mustache. He received hearty applause from the assembled crowds as he disembarked. Here was the anticipated savior, poised to liberate them from the calamity and devastation they were enduring. Yet Pershing would keep the French waiting for several months, allowing their soldiers to continue suffering before permitting his forces to provide any assistance. The American troops accompanying him were little more than civilians dressed in military attire. Pershing's primary task in Europe, which he executed with great effectiveness, was to establish a cohesive organization. It would take over a year for him to transform his small, inexperienced contingent into a formidable, highly trained army. This force would not only play a crucial role in securing victory in the war, but would also lay the groundwork for the modern American military that would shape the 20th century. When World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, John Pershing observed from across the Atlantic. As the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, fought against Germany and Austria-Hungary, the United States maintained a distance, viewing the conflict as a European issue. However, 3 years later, following the sinking of 4 unarmed American vessels by German submarines, President Woodrow Wilson recognized that the nation could no longer remain uninvolved. On April 6, 1917, the United States formally declared war on Germany. The individual chosen by President Wilson to lead the American forces was Major General John Pershing, then 56 years old, the only officer with significant experience in commanding large military units at that time. He was appointed to lead the Expeditionary Force into Mexico in 1916 with the objective of pursuing Pancho Villa. As a result, he was regarded as the sole officer possessing significant experience in commanding large units. However, the U.S. troops under Pershing's command in Mexico functioned more as an enhanced police unit comprising fewer than 15,000 personnel. The soldiers operated on horseback and utilized relatively rudimentary weaponry, such as rifles and bayonets. World War I represented a fundamentally different type of warfare, characterized by an unprecedented scale and scope. A total of 16 nations mobilized nearly 65 million soldiers for a conflict that spanned 3 continents. New combat technologies, including poison gas, machine guns, flamethrowers, tanks, and aircraft, were employed with devastating efficiency. The casualty figures from World War I are staggering. For instance, the British suffered a loss of 20,000 men in a single day. The French experienced horrific losses at Verdun, which became synonymous with the brutal nature of the conflict. After 3 years of relentless fighting, the war had devolved into a bloody stalemate, with thousands of soldiers sacrificing their lives for mere inches of territory. A continuous line of barbed wire stretched from Switzerland in the south to the English Channel in the north, encompassing 350 miles of barbed wire, trenches, and machine guns. The combatants found themselves ensnared in a war of attrition, focused on inflicting maximum casualties on the enemy to wear them down. Upon his arrival in France in June 1917, Pershing believed he had a more effective strategy for warfare. He recognized that to secure victory, it was essential to move beyond trench warfare and adopt what he termed open warfare. This approach involved driving the Germans out of their trenches and engaging them in open combat, rather than merely pushing them from one trench line to the next. He advocated for offensive tactics aimed at achieving a breakthrough. The French and British had been striving for significant advancements for 3 years without success. They questioned how they could achieve such breakthroughs. During the summer of 1917, the Allies grew increasingly worried that General Pershing was unprepared for the European conflict. The newly implemented draft was set to increase U.S. military personnel from 200,000 to 4 million, providing much-needed reinforcements in Europe. However, it soon became clear that Pershing did not possess the necessary supplies or logistical support to sustain these troops. A British commentator remarked that America resembled a giant armed only with a penknife, lacking sufficient weapons, artillery, and even helmets. This situation fostered a sentiment of disappointment, as the Allies expected American assistance, but found the U.S. unready for combat. The British and French believed that the most efficient way to integrate American forces into the battle was through a strategy known as amalgamation. This approach would involve incorporating American soldiers into Allied units that were severely depleted in manpower. The Allies were eager for reinforcements, confident that their existing logistical frameworks could accommodate American troops seamlessly. They were taken aback when Pershing firmly rejected this proposal, insisting that American forces would operate as an independent army. Pershing emphasized that American troops would not be deployed in a fragmented manner. Instead, they would train and develop cohesively as a unified American army, ready to engage in combat only when fully prepared. On the surface, his resistance to amalgamation was based on practical considerations. He recognized that many American soldiers were of Irish descent and might feel uncomfortable in British uniforms. Additionally, the number of Americans fluent in French was minimal, which would complicate their integration into French units. Ultimately, Pershing aimed to maintain the distinct identity and unity of the U.S. Army to demonstrate America's strength on the global stage. Pershing was resolute in resisting European pressure to allow the American forces to be fragmented and utilized as replacements. Such an arrangement was deemed unacceptable, as it would obscure the distinct contributions of the United States, reducing its role to merely a component of the broader Allied efforts, overshadowed by the actions of the French and British. However, this determination to maintain an independent American army raised concerns among the Allies and some Americans who feared that Pershing's steadfastness might jeopardize the war effort. Despite the increasing calls for integration, Pershing remained firm in his stance. His resilience during 1917 and 1918 in France can be attributed to his long history of standing alone against prevailing opinions, a pattern that characterized much of his military career. Pershing's journey began at West Point, where he quickly emerged as a prominent leader. Upon graduating in 1886, the ambitious Pershing actively pursued assignments that would enhance his career. He demonstrated his leadership capabilities during the Indian Wars, participated in the Spanish-American War, where he was noted for his composure under fire, and gained fame for his command of American troops in the Philippines. His drive stemmed from his personal attributes. Pershing was characterized by his hard work and determination, with the latter being perhaps the most fitting descriptor for him. He aspired to achieve greatness. In the Library of Congress, one can find a small booklet among his papers, reminiscent of the success manual carried by Gatsby in Ford F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel, which indicates his keen interest in the pursuit of success. He was undoubtedly a man of great ambition. In 1905, Pershing entered into matrimony with Helen Warren, the daughter of a prominent senator from Wyoming. This union led some to perceive him as a calculating social climber. Marrying the daughter of a senator who chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee, and who was an acquaintance, if not a confidant, of Theodore Roosevelt, undoubtedly provided him with advantages. Just a year following their wedding, President Theodore Roosevelt made a remarkable decision. He elevated the 46-year-old Pershing from the rank of captain to brigadier general, disregarding the seniority of numerous other officers. This action effectively isolated Pershing within the American officer corps, as he was promoted over 800 other officers, many of whom harbored resentment towards him for this leap in rank. Pershing dismissed the allegations of political favoritism. As his career progressed, he and Helen began to build their life together. However, inquiries into Pershing's motivations for marrying Helen Warren were tragically silenced on August 27, 1915, when a devastating fire broke out at the Presidio military base in San Francisco. The inferno consumed the Pershing residence, resulting in the deaths of Helen and 3 of their 4 children. At that time, Pershing was stationed in Texas and was left utterly shattered by the tragedy. His colleagues feared he might succumb to madness. While it is a tragic way to demonstrate love, this event revealed the depth of his affection for Helen. The experience transformed his life in 2 significant ways. Firstly, he became increasingly reserved, having already been quite austere, and this loss deepened that demeanor. Secondly, he dedicated himself to his professional duties. Following 1915, he seemed to conclude that his only remaining purpose was his role as an officer in the United States Army. By the time he arrived in Europe during World War I, He was fully committed to his responsibilities as a commanding officer. In the face of significant Allied pressure to surrender troops, he focused on establishing an independent American army. Pershing anticipated the arrival of over 2 million soldiers in Europe within the next year. Prior to their deployment, he recognized the necessity of creating a robust organizational structure to accommodate them. He undertook a comprehensive restructuring of his officer staff to effectively address the immense logistical challenges ahead. At the onset of World War I, the American Army's battle organization relied heavily on the commanding general, a method that had proven disastrous during the Spanish-American War due to logistical failures. Upon his arrival, Pershing was resolute in forming a dedicated team of officers tasked solely with the planning and organization of not only campaigns and battles, but also all supporting elements, including supplies, food, and ammunition. This monumental undertaking was made feasible by the presence of a talented group of young officers, including future military leaders such as George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, and George Marshall. This collaboration significantly contributed to the legacy of John Pershing, as he played a crucial role in nurturing the development of other prominent American commanders, relying heavily on their expertise. At their headquarters located in a chateau near Paris, Pershing and his team worked diligently. They established training facilities where soldiers could familiarize themselves with the new technologies employed in both ground and aerial combat. An intricate supply chain was developed, utilizing horses, trucks, and trains to ensure a steady flow of food, clothing, and ammunition to the front lines. They installed over 22,000 miles of telephone wire to facilitate communication between headquarters and distant units. Their overarching objective was to guarantee that the soldiers engaged in combat received all necessary support. Pershing insisted that all operations adhere to the highest standards. He is resolute in his belief that they will succeed in their endeavors. Should they fail to meet his standards, he is fully prepared to remove them from their positions. During World War I, he demonstrated his exceptional managerial skills. He established a formidable organization, selecting capable individuals to lead it and ensuring that proficient planners were part of his team. This was his significant contribution. While it may not seem particularly glamorous, it is important to recognize his effectiveness as a manager. In contrast, the American public often idolizes generals like George Patton, who are characterized by their daring and bold actions. However, there is a well-known military adage: amateurs focus on strategy and tactics, while professionals concentrate on logistics. In the conflicts that Pershing faced, as well as in the wars America engaged in during the 20th century, effective organization and management proved to be as crucial as the tactics employed on the battlefield. Nevertheless, by 1917, the extensive organizing efforts were consuming valuable time that Pershing's increasingly anxious allies felt was in short supply. 6 months after the United States entered the war, not a single American division was involved in combat. Each day that American forces remained inactive was another day that the French were enduring casualties. This situation was bound to create tension between the Allied nations. In November, the strain on this relationship intensified when Russia, an ally of France and Britain on the Eastern Front, negotiated a truce with Germany and withdrew from the conflict. Consequently, a sense of urgency began to permeate the minds of commanders on the Western Front, as they understood that the German troops previously engaged in Russia would soon return to the Western Front. The Americans needed to be prepared to confront these forces, as the British and French doubted their ability to manage the situation. By the spring of 1918, these apprehensions were realized. In March, the Germans initiated a series of 5 consecutive offensives that posed a significant threat to the Allies' position. Utilizing reinforcements arriving from Russia, they launched a substantial assault against both French and British forces, achieving a breakthrough that raised concerns about the potential capture of Paris. In response, General Haig, the commander of British troops, dispatched a telegram to his forces, emphasizing that retreat was not an option. He insisted that they must hold their ground, regardless of the circumstances. Amidst this escalating crisis, the British and French turned to the United States, seeking additional manpower to bolster their efforts. In light of the urgent situation, General Pershing made concessions regarding the integration of American troops, albeit on his own conditions. He permitted U.S. forces to operate under European command, but insisted they remain organized in distinct American divisions, and only for a limited duration. In critical situations, Pershing was prepared to allow American troops to serve under foreign commanders at the highest levels, but he maintained a strong desire to retain control over these forces. American divisions were subsequently deployed to the front lines, effectively blocking the route to Paris and contributing to the repulsion of the German advance. This development represented more of a psychological and emotional triumph than a complete tactical victory. Nevertheless, the involvement of American forces became an undeniable factor in the conflict. The success of the American contingent enhanced Pershing's standing among his European counterparts, leading them to agree to the establishment of an independent American army. Throughout the summer of 1918, American divisions that had previously been dispersed among Allied units were consolidated and unified. The initial mission of the American forces would involve assaulting a 4-year-old entrenchment of German soldiers situated near the town of Saint-Michel. The Germans had successfully breached the Allied defenses in that area, resulting in a heavily fortified protrusion in the front lines. The French lacked the necessary strength to eliminate this bulge, prompting the Americans to view it as an opportunity to prove themselves. Should the Americans succeed in dismantling the bulge, it would facilitate further offensives against German railway lines and critical coal and iron mines. On September 12, 1918, over a year after their arrival in Europe, General Pershing commanded the 1st American Army into combat. He addressed the nation regarding the significant contributions this army was poised to make. 3,000 miles from home, an American army is engaged in battle on your behalf. Everything you value is at risk. Calling upon the spirit of our ancestors, the Army seeks your unwavering support to ensure that the noble ideals for which America stands may persist on this earth. Pershing is resolute in his belief that the Americans will perform admirably, and he orders them to advance against the salient. The outcome is a decisive victory for the Americans as they swiftly drive the Germans back. Within just a few hours of the assault, they surpassed their initial objectives for the day, achieving more than anticipated. Pershing interprets this success as validation, not only for his vision of a unified American army, but also for the broader American strategies and tactics employed. Open combat, rather than trench warfare, has demonstrated to the Old World that their methods have been misguided and that the Americans possess superior capabilities. Pershing was thrilled with the achievements at San Miguel, where his forces captured 16,000 prisoners and reclaimed 200 square miles of territory within just 2 days. However, there was more to the situation than Pershing understood. It became evident that the Germans were already in retreat when the American offensive commenced, meaning the Americans were attacking the rear of a withdrawing army. The true challenge for the American forces would arise 2 weeks later, in October 1918, in the Meuse-Argonne region. Here, Pershing's troops would be tasked with a crucial role in a campaign aimed at decisively expelling the Germans from France. This time, the Americans would face significant difficulties. In the Meuse-Argonne, the Germans were prepared to resist. For the first time, American soldiers encountered the realities of trench warfare, facing a well-organized enemy equipped with machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery positioned for defense. Over the ensuing weeks, tens of thousands of American lives would be lost. Signs of disarray began to emerge, revealing cracks within the military structure. Challenges arose at the planning and logistics levels as the transition from the San Miguel offensive to the Meuse-Argonne offensive proved to be a daunting task. The newly formed American army was finally grappling with the dire conditions that had long afflicted the Allies. Despite Pershing's assertions regarding open warfare and the strength of an independent American force, his troops struggled to achieve their objectives on the battlefield. Pershing believed he could perform the task more effectively. Ultimately, his performance was likely comparable to that of his peers. He faced criticism from other Allied commanders regarding the Meuse-Argonne offensive, who felt a sense of satisfaction in demonstrating the challenges he had encountered over the previous 3 years. Nevertheless, despite the mounting criticism and increasing casualties, Pershing remained resolute. His leadership was characterized by determination. When faced with adversity, he insisted on continuing the advance. While his tactical contributions may not have been significant, his command and inspirational leadership were vital. Often we refer to Gettysburg as the greatest battle due to its 3-day duration and scale. However, the Meuse-Argonne was a more extensive engagement than any that preceded or followed it, surpassing even D-Day in size. 1 million American soldiers participated in the Meuse-Argonne campaign, which was led by Pershing. These troops endured 7 arduous weeks before achieving a breakthrough. Their efforts, combined with those of Allied forces in neighboring operations, ultimately overwhelmed the German defenses. On November 11, 1918, marking the 47th day of the Meuse-Argonne, the Germans consented to an armistice. In recognition of his role in this victory, Pershing led a victorious procession through the streets of Paris and was celebrated as a hero upon his return to America. Following World War I, the American public predominantly recognized only one name, Pershing. It was a significant triumph, and he was regarded as a remarkable hero. However, the extent of Pershing's actual contribution to the victory in the war has been a subject of debate for many years. While the involvement of Pershing and the American forces in achieving victory was considerable, it was not the determining factor. There exists a common perception that the Americans arrived and single-handedly secured victory. In reality, the war was predominantly won by the British and French forces, with American support playing a crucial role. It is my belief that the Allies would not have achieved victory had the Americans remained uninvolved. At best, they might have reached a stalemate or potentially faced defeat. Without American forces, it is uncertain how the British and French would have managed to halt the German advance. The success was not due to American combat skills, tactics, or strategies, but rather the logistical capability of deploying 2 million troops to the front lines in a relatively short time frame, which was instrumental in securing victory. Following the war, Pershing's army of 2 million was significantly reduced. The United States then entered a phase of isolationism, and by 1932, the U.S. Army was ranked 17th globally. Despite the rapid dissolution of the American forces that fought in World War I, Pershing's influence on the military remains enduring. He effectively established a precedent for an American army that could be rapidly expanded as necessary, built upon a core group of officers and personnel skilled in organizing and managing such a force. The framework he developed continues to exist, and Pershing would witness this structure being activated once more nearly 2 decades later during World War II. The young men whom he had trained during the First World War, now prominent officers such as George Marshall and George Patton, would utilize their experiences to contribute to the defeat of the Nazis and the Japanese forces. General John J. Pershing passed away on July 15, 1948, at the age of 87. Many decades after he had led America in World War I, the nation he dedicated his life to had not forgotten his contributions. Pershing's funeral was marked by a grand ceremony attended by numerous five-star generals. It was evident that they recognized the significance of his legacy to the American military, as it was his World War I Army that laid the groundwork for the forces of World War II. This was an army equipped with modern staff and had engaged in large-scale operations unprecedented in history. His remarkable achievement was the establishment and preservation of this formidable organization, demonstrating his strength of character and unwavering determination.